Welcome to this peaceful moment. Here, you will discover stories inspired by the quiet beauty of Japan. Each tale is like a soft breeze through a bamboo grove, carrying you away from the worries of the day. Imagine the scent of blooming cherry blossoms and the gentle flow of a nearby clear stream. Let these words and sounds cradle your mind in calm and serenity. Tonight, permit yourself to drift into a restful sleep. Let us begin this journey together. The Whisper of the Wind in Bamboo. Prologue. The bamboo grove. The mountains rose like old guardians at the edge of the valley, their slopes softened by centuries of rain, wind, and the green that clung to them. In the heart of this valley lay a village neither large nor famous, but remembered by travelers who passed through for its quiet, almost timeless air. Here, the seasons were felt deeply. The rice fields mirrored the sky in spring. Cicadas cried endlessly through the summer heat, and in autumn, golden leaves carpeted the narrow paths between houses. Winter came with snow that hushed even the chatter of the river. But beyond the rice fields and wooden houses, past the moss-covered steps of the old shrine, there stretched a grove of bamboo. It was no ordinary grove. Villagers spoke of it with a mixture of reverence and unease. The bamboo stood tall, their emerald stalks rising like pillars of another world, their leaves whispering even when the air seemed still. On nights when the moon was bright, the grove glowed faintly, as if the stalks themselves remembered a hidden light. To the villagers, the bamboo grove was sacred. Children were told not to wander too deep, for the path twisted and turned in ways that confused even the sharpest eye. Some said foxes lived within, capable of leading men astray with illusions. Others claimed that the wind, when it rustled the leaves, carried the voices of ancestors. For Haru, a boy of 9, the grove was both mystery and refuge. He had grown up listening to its whispers from afar, lying awake at night while the wind carried fragments of sound into his small home. His grandmother, who lived with them, would smile softly and say, "The bamboo remembers." If you listen carefully, you may hear what has been forgotten by men. Those words stayed with Haru. And one evening, unable to resist, he followed the path into the grove for the first time. Chapter 1. A Child's Listening. The path into the grove was narrow, the earth damp beneath Haru's sandals. The air changed as soon as he crossed the first line of stalks. It grew cooler, heavy with a green scent like crushed leaves and rain. Sunlight filtered through in broken shards, illuminating drifting specks of dust. Haru walked slowly, his heart pounding. Every sound felt sharper. Hear the creak of a swaying stalk, the drop of water onto leaves, the faint rustle of unseen creatures moving through the undergrowth. The grove seemed alive, not simply a collection of trees, but a body with breath and memory. He stopped when the path bent around a cluster of unusually thick stalks. Closing his eyes, he listened. At first, all he heard was the usual rustle of leaves. But gradually, he began to notice patterns, pauses, rises, a rhythm almost like speech. His grandmother's words returned to him. The bamboo remembers. Suddenly, a breeze swept through the grove, and the stalks swayed together. The sound deepened, resonant, like the hum of a great bell. Haru gasped. For a moment, he thought he heard his father's voice, soft, distant, but clear enough to bring a sting to his eyes. His father had died when Haru was too young to remember his face, and yet, here, a fragment of him seemed to echo in the wind. Haru. The boy spun around, but no one was there. Only bamboo stretches endlessly in every direction. Fear gripped him, but stronger still was wonder. The grove was speaking to him. He could not explain how, but he felt certain. As he stood frozen, a voice interrupted, not from the wind, but human, steady, and low. "You hear it, don't you?" Haru turned. A man in robes stood a few paces away, half hidden by the stalks. His head was shaved, his face calm, eyes dark as river stones. He carried a wooden staff, worn smooth by years of use. A monk, Haru whispered, remembering stories his grandmother told of wandering priests who sometimes came down from the mountains. The monk inclined his head. Few children wander this far alone. Fewer still can hear the true voice of the bamboo. Haru blinked. It spoke. "I think I heard my father." The monk studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Perhaps you did. The bamboo does not lie, but it speaks in many tongues. To one, it may sound like the voice of the departed. To another, it is a reminder of silence. What you hear is what you need." The boy frowned. "What do I need?" The monk tapped his staff against the earth. "Your heart is open, but it seeks. That is why the grove spoke." Haru wanted to ask more, but the monk was already turning away. "Wait!" he cried, running after him. "Will you teach me to understand what it says?" The monk stopped. For a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, he murmured, "The grove itself is your teacher. If you wish to learn, return. Listen, not only with your ears, but with all of yourself." Then, as silently as he had appeared, the monk stepped deeper into the grove, his form swallowed by the stalks until Haru could no longer see him. Haru stood alone, the whispers rising once more around him. And for the first time, he understood that the bamboo was not just sound. It was a voice, vast and patient, waiting for those willing to listen. Chapter 2: The Monk's Teaching. The days that followed were restless for Haru. At school, he struggled to focus on his lessons, his mind drifting back to the grove. He sketched bamboo stalks in the margins of his notebook, tried to mimic their whispers with his breath, and stared out the window whenever the wind shook the trees. At home, his mother noticed. "You're dreaming again," she said gently as they ate supper. Haru nodded but said nothing. She worked long hours weaving straw mats, her hands rough but careful, her eyes often tired. Haru wanted to tell her about the monk, about hearing his father's voice, but some instinct held him back. The grove felt like a secret too fragile to share. So he returned, again and again, whenever he could. Each time, the grove greeted him with new sounds, a chorus of high, trembling notes when the breeze was soft. A deep, shuddering rumble when the wind rushed hard. Sometimes it felt like laughter, sometimes like sighing. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, he found the monk again. He was seated on a flat stone, eyes closed, the staff lying across his knees. Haru approached quietly, but the monk spoke without opening his eyes. "You came back." "Yes," Haru whispered, sitting on the ground before him. "I want to learn." The monk finally opened his eyes, regarding the boy. "Then listen. Tell me what you hear." Haru closed his eyes, straining. At first, only rustling. Then, slowly, he noticed layers. The higher leaves spoke in quick, light tones, like children chattering. The thick stalks groaned low, steady, as if carrying great weight. Between them was silence, wide and patient. "It's many voices," Haru murmured. "But they're all part of one sound." The monk's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Good. You see the unity. Most hear only noise. You hear harmony." Encouraged, Haru asked, "What does it mean? What are they saying?" The monk tilted his head. "Meaning is not always given. Often, it is made. When you hear the bamboo, you hear yourself. What you take from it will shape who you become." The words puzzled Haru, yet they resonated like the deep hum of the stalks. He wanted to understand more, but the monk rose, leaning on his staff. "That is enough for today. Do not rush. The grove reveals itself slowly, like dawn. Will I see you again?" Haru asked eagerly. The monk paused, his figure outlined by fading light. "Perhaps. But even if you do not, the grove will speak. Do not forget, listen not only with your ears, but with your heart." Then he was gone again, his presence fading into the shadows of the bamboo. That night, Haru lay awake, the sound of the grove echoing in his memory. He felt as though the whispers were seeping into him, filling places he had not known were empty. And though he was only a boy, he sensed that his life had shifted, drawn onto a hidden path by the voice of the wind in bamboo. Chapter 3: Echoes of the Past. The days grew shorter as autumn deepened. Crimson maples burned along the river banks, and the air carried the faint chill of approaching winter. Yet within the bamboo grove, time felt suspended. The leaves stayed green, their whispers unbroken by the turning of seasons. Haru went often now. Sometimes, he found the monk seated upon the same stone, still as the bamboo itself. Other times, the grove held only silence, the monk's presence like a dream half remembered. On one such day, Haru asked, "Why do you stay here? Don't monks live in temples?" The monk's eyes softened, though shadows lingered in them. "Some do. Some wander. I have walked many paths, but for me, this grove has become a temple enough." Haru tilted his head. "But why? Isn't it lonely?" The monk touched the nearest stalk with his palm. Lonely? No. Listen well, and you will hear that nothing is ever truly alone. Each stalk bends with the wind, yet stands with countless others. Together, they are a forest. Together, they breathe as one. Haru thought of his father then, of how his mother often worked alone in silence. He wondered if she, too, was part of a forest he could not yet see. The monk must have sensed his thought, for he added quietly, "When the bamboo whispers, it carries voices of the past. Not just of those who lived here, but of all who came before. The wind is old, the earth older still. If you listen deeply enough, even the dead may speak." Haru's heart quickened. "I heard my father once. Could I hear him again?" The monk regarded him carefully. "Perhaps. But do not cling too tightly. The bamboo teaches us that voices rise and fall like the wind. If you grasp too hard, you will hear only your own longing." The boy lowered his gaze, uncertain. Yet that night, he returned, kneeling in the grove beneath the moonlight. He closed his eyes and listened, holding his breath until the sound came. It was faint at first, like the murmur of water through stones. Then, clearer, shaping into words. "Haru." His father's voice again. Gentle, yet carrying weight. "Do not be afraid," it whispered. "I walk with you." Tears slipped down Haru's cheeks, though he did not open his eyes. He pressed his palms together, as he had seen his grandmother do before the shrine. For the first time, he felt not only grief but peace. The wind rose, and the voice faded. Yet Haru remained, heart filled with the hush of something greater than himself. Chapter 4: The Festival of Lanterns. As the village prepared for the annual autumn festival, Haru carried the grove's whispers in his chest. Paper lanterns hung from wooden poles, their colors bright against the darkening sky. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts, miso soup, and grilled fish. Children ran through the streets, their laughter mingling with the music of flutes and drums. Haru walked beside his mother, who carried a small lantern painted with chrysanthemums. "Your father and I used to come here together," she said softly, her eyes on the lantern swaying in the breeze. "He always said the light reminded him of stars caught on Earth." Haru hesitated before asking, "Do you ever hear him? Like his voice?" His mother gave him a puzzled look. "Only in memory." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes in dreams." "Why do you ask?" Haru opened his mouth, then closed it. The grove was still his secret. Instead, he said, "I just wondered." As night deepened, villagers gathered by the riverbank. One by one, they set their lanterns afloat, candles flickering within. The current carried them gently downstream, a glowing procession of light mirrored on the water. Haru stood watching, his heart stirred. The lanterns seemed like voices too fragile, glowing, carried by currents unseen. Each one held a prayer, a memory, a name whispered to the night. Beside him, his grandmother bowed her head. Her voice was low but steady as she murmured words of offering. Haru, too, whispered his father's name, sending it into the dark with the lanterns. And then he heard it. Not from the water, but from the wind. A faint murmur through the bamboo grove that bordered the river. Though no one else seemed to notice, Haru's ears caught it instantly. The wind bent the stalks, and the bamboo answered, though it was far from the grove itself. "I am here," it seemed to say. "I walk with you still." Haru's eyes widened, his breath catching. For a heartbeat, the lanterns on the river blurred, their light mingling with tears. He felt a hand on his shoulder. The monk stood behind him, as though he had always been there, though Haru had not seen him arrive. "The wind carries further than you think," the monk said softly. "Tonight, many voices rise. Yours among them." Haru looked up at him. "Do you hear them too?" The monk's gaze drifted to the lanterns. "I hear what the wind chooses to give. And I let it pass, like water through open hands." Haru frowned. "But I don't want it to pass. I want it to stay." The monk knelt so their eyes met. "Then let it stay in you. Not as sound, but as memory, as kindness, as strength." That is how voices live on. Haru held those words close as the lanterns drifted away into darkness, their glow fading like stars swallowed by dawn. That night, the bamboo grove whispered more softly than usual, as if it too had bowed in reverence to the river of light. Chapter 5: Storm and Silence. The winter winds arrived early that year. By late November, the air carried a biting chill, and even the bamboo grove, usually so serene, groaned under the weight of the season's breath. Haru climbed the familiar path after helping his mother stack firewood. His fingers were red with cold, but his heart was warm with anticipation. The grove was his refuge now, the place where the world widened beyond grief. But as he entered, he felt something different. The wind howled with unusual force, rattling the stalks until they clashed like swords. The grove, once a temple of whispers, had become a battlefield of sound. "Why is it so angry?" Haru shouted into the noise, half expecting no reply. Yet through the clamor, the monk's voice came, low and calm, as though it rose from the roots themselves. "The wind is not angry. It only shows you its other face. Peace cannot exist without storm, just as light cannot shine without shadow." Haru turned and found the monk standing near the heart of the grove. His robes whipped violently, but his figure remained steady. "Come closer," the monk called. Haru obeyed, stumbling over fallen leaves. When he reached him, the monk placed a hand on his shoulder. "Close your eyes. Do not resist the storm. Listen." At first, all Haru heard was chaos: the cracking, the hissing, the violent crash of bamboo striking bamboo. But as he steadied his breath, he began to hear beneath it a rhythm, subtle yet unbroken, like the pulse of the earth itself. "The storm is not only destruction," the monk said. "It is cleansing. Old stalks break, making way for new ones. The forest teaches us that even in loss, life prepares its next beginning." Haru shivered. He thought of his father, of the lantern drifting away, of the voice carried on the wind. So even storms can carry voices too? The monk nodded. Especially storms. Just then, a tremendous gust bent the grove nearly to its knees. A loud crack split the air as one ancient stalk toppled, crashing to the ground. Haru flinched, but the monk did not move. "See?" he said gently. "An ending. Yet tomorrow, light will touch the ground where shadows once were. And in time, new shoots will rise." Haru gazed at the fallen stalk, its hollow core exposed. For the first time, he understood that fragility and strength lived side by side, that one could break and still give life. The storm passed suddenly, as storms often do, leaving the grove hushed. The monk lowered his hand from Haru's shoulder. "Remember this. Do not fear the breaking. Fear only forgetting to listen." Chapter 6: The Hidden Letter. Snow fell in delicate silence over the village. Roofs wore white caps, and children tumbled through drifts with bright scarves trailing behind them. Haru helped his mother sweep the path to their home, though his thoughts always lingered on the grove. One afternoon, after a long day of chores, he slipped away again. The bamboo, now dusted with snow, glimmered under the pale winter sun. As he wandered deeper, something caught his eye near the roots of one of the older stalks, a scrap of cloth, weathered and half-buried. Curious, Haru knelt and brushed the snow aside. Beneath it lay a small wooden box, no larger than his hand. Its lid was carved with faded patterns, though the design had nearly worn away. He lifted it gently and opened it. Inside rested a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. With trembling hands, Haru unfolded it and read, "To whoever finds this, know that you are not alone. This grove carries our voices, our prayers, our longing. When storms come, we bend. When silence falls, we wait. If you listen, truly listen, you will hear us, as I heard those before me." There was no signature, only the mark of a single brushstroke, a circle, imperfect yet whole. Haru's heart pounded. He ran to the monk, who sat as always upon his stone seat, snow gathering upon his shoulders. "Look!" Haru exclaimed, holding out the letter. "Someone wrote this long ago. They heard the voices, too." The monk took the paper, his expression unreadable. He traced the brushstroke with his finger. "Yes. Others have walked this path. This grove has been a place of listening for many generations. Do you know who wrote it?" Haru asked eagerly. The monk's eyes softened. "No one knows. And perhaps it does not matter. What matters is that the voice reached you, even across time. That is the true gift of the bamboo. It carries not only the wind, but memory." Haru stared at the letter, awe filling him. "So I'm part of this, too? Part of everyone who listened before?" The monk placed a hand over the boy's. "Yes. You are a link in the chain. And one day, perhaps, you will leave your own whisper here for another to hear." The thought filled Haru with both wonder and a sense of responsibility. He folded the letter carefully and returned it to the box, placing it once more at the roots where he had found it. Snow fell over it gently, sealing it back into the earth. As evening descended, the grove stirred with a soft wind. Haru closed his eyes, and amid the whisper of leaves, he thought he heard not only his father, but countless others, men, women, children, voices blending like a chorus beyond time. And for the first time, he did not weep. Instead, he smiled. Epilogue: The Eternal Whisper. Spring returned to the valley, gentle and unhurried. The snow melted into rivulets that fed the fields, and tender shoots of green pushed through the soil. In the bamboo grove, broken stalks from the winter storm had already given way to new growth, their pale stems stretching upward like hopeful prayers. Haru, now a little taller and surer in his steps, made his way along the familiar path. He no longer came only to seek comfort, he came as one who belonged. The grove was not just a refuge now, it was a companion, a teacher, and a keeper of his father's memory. The monk was waiting for him near the center of the grove, seated upon the worn stone that had weathered decades of wind and rain. His robe was patched from age, yet his posture remained steady, as if rooted like the bamboo itself. "You came," the monk said with a faint smile. "Of course," Haru replied. "I wanted to tell you I think I understand now." The monk tilted his head. "And what is it you understand?" "That the whispers aren't only my father's voice," Haru said slowly. "They're everyone's, the voices of people who lived, who hoped, who lost, and who remembered. It's all of them together. And maybe my father is part of that, too." The monk's eyes glimmered with quiet approval. "You have listened well." They sat in silence for a while, letting the wind play its song through the stalks. The sound was not the same as last year's, no whisper ever repeated itself exactly. Each moment carried its own rhythm, fleeting yet eternal. After some time, Haru spoke again. "I found something. A stone near my home that my father once carved. It was just his mark, a small circle. The same as the one on the letter we found." The monk raised his brows slightly. "Perhaps your father, too, was once a listener here." The thought startled Haru. "You mean he might have written that letter?" "Perhaps. Or perhaps another before him. The truth may be lost, but the meaning remains. The circle is not about the hand that drew it, but about the endlessness it represents." Haru closed his eyes, letting the wind brush across his face. He could almost imagine his father's hands guiding him, not through words, but through the simple act of listening. The Lantern Festival. That summer, the village gathered for the Festival of Lanterns. Haru and his mother joined the crowd along the river bank, each person holding a paper lantern with a small flame inside. The night was warm, and the air buzzed with cicadas and laughter. Haru's lantern bore no name, only a circle drawn carefully with ink. When the signal came, he placed it gently upon the water and watched as it drifted among hundreds of others. Their reflections shimmering like stars scattered across the current. As the lanterns floated downstream, Haru felt a stillness within him. He no longer strained to hear his father's voice. He knew it was there, part of the chorus, mingling with the river, the air, the bamboo. Beside him, his mother whispered, he would be proud. Haru smiled softly. He's here. I can hear him. The monk's departure. Weeks later, when Haru returned to the grove, he found the monk waiting with an expression he had never seen before, a mixture of peace and farewell. My time in this village is ending, the monk said gently. I must journey to another place, where the wind calls me. Haru's heart tightened. But who will stay here? Who will listen? The monk reached out and touched the boy's chest. You will. You already carry the grove within you. The bamboo is not bound to this place alone, it lives wherever you listen. Haru fought back tears. Will I ever see you again? The monk's smile was faint, almost like the curve of a crescent moon. Perhaps in another season, another life. But remember, each time the wind stirs, I am there, as is everyone who ever listened. And with that, he rose, his figure blending with the green of the stalks, until he seemed less a man than part of the grove itself. Years passing. Time flowed like a river. Haru grew older, his shoulders broadening, his hands rough with work in the fields. Yet he never stopped visiting the bamboo. Sometimes he came alone, sometimes with his mother, and later, with children of his own. He told them stories of the grove, the whispers, the storm, the hidden letter. And sometimes, when the wind rose, he would fall silent and let them listen for themselves. Do you hear it? He would ask. And the children would nod, their eyes wide. It's like voices. So many voices. Haru would smile then, knowing the chain had not been broken. The eternal whisper. One evening, long after the lanterns had floated away and the cicadas had quieted, Haru stood alone in the grove. The moon shone silver upon the stalks, and the wind carried its eternal song. He closed his eyes and listened. The voices were many, yet one. They were his father, the monk, the villagers, the countless listeners before him. They were sorrow and joy, silence and storm. They were life itself, fragile and enduring. Haru breathed deeply, and in that moment, he understood fully the grove was not merely a place. It was a mirror of the heart, a reminder that no one is ever truly alone. As the wind moved through the bamboo, it carried forward. Not just memory, but promise, the promise that every voice, once heard, becomes part of the eternal whisper. And so Haru stood, listening, smiling, as the bamboo swayed like an endless prayer beneath the sky. The quiet forest in snowfall. Prologue. The snowfall begins. The first snow of winter always carried with it a hush, as though the world itself paused to listen. On this night, the valley lay hidden beneath the falling veil. The river slowed beneath sheets of white, the rooftops of the village softened into rounded mounds, and every path was erased, leaving only stillness. Kato stood at the edge of the village, gazing toward the forest that loomed beyond the frozen fields. It was not his first winter, yet the weight of this snowfall seemed different, heavier, quieter, more insistent. Each flake caught the lantern's glow as it drifted down, turning the air into a slow, endless dance. The villagers had already retreated indoors, fires burning behind shuttered windows, but something in Kato's heart urged him outward. His father often spoke of the forest in winter, how its silence was like the breath of old spirits. As a boy, he had only half listened, but now, older, with the loss of his father still fresh, the forest seemed to call him. He adjusted the scarf around his neck, tightened the cord of his coat, and stepped forward. The crunch of his boots was muffled almost immediately, as though the snow sought to erase even that small defiance of silence. The forest accepted him without protest. The tall pines leaned inward, their branches heavy with white, arching to form a gate of stillness. Snowflakes continued to fall, catching in his hair, melting against his warm breath. For a moment, Kato thought he heard something, a faint whisper, or perhaps the sigh of the trees bending under their burden. It was not frightening, only profound, like entering a temple at night when the incense still lingers but no one is there. "Father," he murmured to the stillness, his breath rising in a brief cloud. "I will find what you saw." The forest did not answer, but the soft hush of falling snow. Yet that hush was enough. Chapter 1: A path beneath white branches. The further Kato walked, the less he felt tethered to the village behind him. The world of warmth and voices, of firelight and laughter, faded until only the snow remained, covering every sound. Each step seemed to take him deeper into a place beyond time. The path beneath his boots was barely visible. The snowfall had erased all trace of those who might have passed before. Only the faint line where the trees parted suggested a way forward. Branches sagged low, some brushing his shoulders as he ducked beneath them. He paused often to take in the quiet. The silence of the forest was not empty, it was full, layered with subtleties. The faint creak of a bough bending. The distant crack of ice shifting on a stream. Even the fall of snow carried its own rhythm, like tiny bells muted by distance. A sudden flutter startled him, a bird, pale against the dark trunks, burst from a branch and vanished into the falling white. Kato exhaled, realizing how tense he had been. Even small sounds felt immense here. The forest floor revealed shapes beneath the snow, the rounded mound of a stone, the faint outline of an old shrine marker, half buried and forgotten. Kato brushed away the snow with his gloved hand. The weathered surface revealed a carving, an ancient character for quiet. He stared at it for a long moment. His father had once told him that the forest was a keeper of forgotten words. Perhaps this was one of them. He bowed slightly, instinctively, before continuing. Not far ahead, he saw movement. A fox stood upon the path, its fur dusted with snow, its eyes gleaming with a strange calm. It did not flee. Instead, it watched him, as though measuring his intent. Kato slowed his steps. "Are you the guardian here?" he whispered. The fox tilted its head, ears twitching, then padded silently into the trees. Its tracks left a faint trail in the snow, leading deeper into the forest. Without hesitation, Kato followed. The trail wound between clusters of bamboo that stood improbably among the pines, their slender stalks bowed under the weight of white. The fox moved easily, pausing now and then to glance back as if ensuring Kato did not lose his way. The snowfall thickened. Soon, the boy could barely see beyond a dozen steps, but the fox's tracks guided him. His breath came harder now, the air sharp in his lungs, yet he pressed on, each step driven by something stronger than curiosity, a sense that the forest held not only silence, but an answer he had long sought. At last, the fox vanished into a grove where the snow seemed deeper, untouched. Kato stopped at its edge, hesitant. The trees here stood wider apart, their branches arching like a hull. In the center rose a small stone shrine, ancient and worn, its roof thick with snow, its front draped with a tattered rope. The fox was gone. Only the shrine remained. Kato approached slowly. His footsteps were muffled by the snow, his breath loud in his own ears. At the base of the shrine lay offerings, old coins, frozen berries, a few folded slips of paper damp with melted snow. He knelt, brushing snow away from the front stone. Beneath the crust of ice was another carving, faint but clear, the same character he had seen before, quiet. The hush around him deepened. For a moment, Kato felt as though the forest itself leaned closer, waiting. He placed his gloved hand against the stone, and in that touch, he felt something stir, not sound, but presence, vast and patient. The snowfall eased, and in the clearing silence, Kato thought he heard his father's voice, soft as breath. "Listen well." His heart tightened, but he did not look around. He closed his eyes and let the silence speak. Chapter 2: The Hermit's Hut. The shrine lingered in Kato's mind long after he left it behind. Its carved word "quiet" seemed to echo in his chest with each breath. He had not truly expected to hear his father's voice in the snow, yet he could not dismiss the feeling that the forest had answered him. The fox's tracks soon vanished into the white, leaving him once more alone. He pressed on, uncertain of his direction, guided only by the faint slope of the land and the steady fall of snow. Hours might have passed. The snow grew deeper, slowing his steps. His legs ached, his gloves stiffened with ice, yet he kept moving. He thought of turning back, but when he glanced behind him, the path was gone. The snowfall had erased it, leaving no return. Forward, then, he muttered to himself, though his voice sounded small. At last, through the blur of falling white, he saw it, a shape that was not tree or stone. A hut, its roof thick with snow, smoke rising faintly from a crooked chimney. Relief surged through him, warming him better than any fire. He hurried forward, stumbling on the last few steps. The hut stood at the base of a slope, half hidden by trees. Its walls were patched with old wood, its windows covered with paper screens dimly lit from within. He knocked once on the frame of the sliding door, unsure what kind of welcome he might find. The door slid open with a rasp. An old man peered out, his beard long and silver, his eyes sharp despite the lines around them. For a moment, the two simply regarded one another, the weary boy with snow clinging to his hair, and the hermit in his threadbare robe. "You walk in storms that wiser feet avoid," the old man said at last, his voice like gravel softened by years. I was following a fox," Kato admitted, realizing how strange it sounded. The old man's gaze did not waver. "Then perhaps the fox wished you to find me. Come in, before the snow buries you." Gratefully, Kato stepped inside. The hut was small but warm. A fire burned in a sunken hearth, its smoke drifting up through the crooked chimney. Simple mats covered the floor, and shelves lined with bundles of herbs and scrolls filled the corners. A pot simmered, releasing the scent of roots and broth. Kato sat near the hearth, thawing his stiff hands. The old man poured tea into 2 chipped cups and offered one. "You carry the look of one searching," the hermit said, settling opposite him. "Not only in these woods, but within yourself." Kato accepted the cup, letting the steam warm his face. "My father spoke of this forest. He said its silence held truth. I needed to know." The hermit studied him. "And what did you find?" Kato hesitated. "A shrine." The word "quiet" is carved into stone. "And I thought I heard his voice." Just for a moment. The old man's eyes softened. "The forest does not speak as men do, but it remembers. Every tree, every flake of snow holds memory. Those who listen closely may hear echoes of what was." Kato's grip tightened on his cup. "So it was only a memory?" "Only?" The hermit shook his head. "Memory is not less real because it has passed. When you hear your father in the snow, it is not the snow alone, it is you, too. The meeting of what remains outside and what endures within." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of the fire. At last, Kato asked, "Do you live here alone?" The old man gave a small smile. "The forest keeps me company. In its quiet, I hear more than I ever did among people. Once, I was not so different from you, wandering, searching. But the snow taught me patience. The wind taught me humility. And the silence taught me how to listen." He reached for a stick and stirred the coals. Sparks leapt, flaring briefly before vanishing into the smoke. "Why did you come, boy?" the hermit asked gently. Kato lowered his gaze. "Because my father is gone. Because I don't understand why the world feels so empty now. And because I thought maybe here, in this forest, I could feel him again." The hermit nodded slowly, as though the answer was both expected and deeply known. "Loss is a snow that falls without end. You cannot stop it. But you can learn to walk within it, to see the beauty of each flake even as it buries what you love." The words settled over Kato like the snow outside, cold, yet strangely comforting. That night, the hermit gave him a mat by the fire. Kato lay awake, listening to the soft hiss of the falling snow against the roof. The silence was heavy, but it no longer felt empty. It was full of memory, of breath, of something larger than himself. In the drifting edge of sleep, he thought he heard the whisper again, like wind through branches. Listen well. The next morning, the storm had not ceased, but the forest glowed faintly in the pale light. The hermit brewed porridge and offered it with a nod. "You may stay until the storm passes," he said, "but know this: the forest gives, and it tests. Do not expect it to yield answers without cost." Kato bowed his head. "I understand." The hermit's eyes glinted. "Do you? Then come. There is something you must see." He wrapped himself in a heavy cloak, took up a staff, and led the way outside. The snow swallowed sound instantly. Together they trudged through drifts nearly to their knees, the hermit steady despite his age. The trees loomed vast, their branches sagging, their silence immense. At last, they reached a clearing where the snow lay unbroken, smooth as a sheet of white paper. In its center stood a single pine, ancient and immense, its trunk scarred with age, its crown dusted in snow. Beneath it lay stones arranged in a circle, half buried by the drifts. The hermit stopped at the edge of the clearing. "Here is where I listen," he said quietly. "Each snowfall, each storm, I return. This tree has stood longer than anyone can remember. It has heard all things and speaks in silence." Kato stepped forward, awe stirring in his chest. The pine seemed alive in a way beyond life, its stillness vast, its presence undeniable. The hermit's voice softened. "Kneel. Place your hand upon the snow. Close your eyes." Kato obeyed. The snow was cold through his glove, numbing his fingers. He closed his eyes, letting his breath slow. At first, there was nothing, only silence, heavy and complete. Then, gradually, he began to hear the creak of a distant branch, the soft sigh of falling snow, the faint pulse of his own heartbeat. And then, beneath it all, a whisper. Not words, not sound, but meaning. "You are not alone." His breath caught. He opened his eyes, snowflakes landing on his lashes. The hermit watched him, expression unreadable. "What did you hear?" the old man asked. Kato swallowed. I don't know. But it felt real." The hermit nodded. "That is enough. The forest has begun to answer you." Chapter 3: Storm of White Silence. The forest tested them sooner than Kato expected. By the third day, the snowfall thickened into a storm. Wind howled through the pines like 1,000 voices, tearing snow from the branches and hurling it across the paths in blinding sheets. The world shrank to a swirl of white. The hermit's hut shuddered in the gale. Still, the old man moved calmly, tightening shutters, feeding the fire. He seemed unsurprised, as though this violence were simply another face of the forest. Kato, however, felt the storm in his bones. Each gust rattled him with fear, and each shriek of the wind pressed against his chest. By nightfall, he could no longer sit still. "Will it ever end?" he asked, pacing. The hermit looked up from the fire. "All things end. But not when you demand it. The storm has its time, just as you do." Kato clenched his fists. "It feels like it's trying to bury us alive." The hermit's eyes glinted. "Then perhaps it wishes to see whether you will rise again." That night, Kato dreamed of endless white swallowing him whole. He woke sweating, the storm still raging. He could not bear it any longer. Against the hermit's protests, he wrapped himself in his cloak and staggered out into the storm. The world outside was chaos. Snow lashed his face, tearing breath from his lungs. The trees loomed like shifting shadows, barely seen. He stumbled forward, driven not by sense but by defiance. "Is this what you want?" he shouted into the storm. "To swallow me too? To take everything?" The wind howled back, merciless. Snow blinded him. His legs weakened, and he fell to his knees in the drifts. For a moment, he wanted to surrender, to sink into the cold and vanish. Then, faintly, he heard it, the whisper, softer than the storm yet distinct. "Stand." His father's voice, or memory, or the forest, it did not matter. He rose, each step a battle, until he could see a dark shape through the storm. The great pine, standing unmoved. He pressed his hand to its trunk, leaning his weight against it. The storm roared, but the tree did not bend. Its silence spoke louder than the wind. Slowly, Kato's breath steadied. He realized the storm was not his enemy. It was only the forest's harshest song, testing whether he could listen past fear. When at last he returned to the hut, soaked and trembling, the hermit met him at the door. "You went to the pine," the old man said, neither angry nor surprised. Kato nodded weakly. "And what did it tell you?" Kato closed his eyes. "That I must stand, even when the world howls." The hermit's expression softened into something like approval. "Then you have begun to hear." Chapter 4 echoes in the frozen stream. When the storm passed, the forest lay transformed. Snowdrifts towered higher than Kato's waist. Branches sagged, heavy with white. The silence afterward was vast, deeper for the memory of the wind. The hermit beckoned him to follow a narrow path, winding down a slope to where a stream once ran. Now it was frozen, its surface sheathed in ice, glittering beneath the pale sun. "This place holds voices," the hermit said, standing at the bank. "Listen." Kato crouched beside the ice. At first, he heard only the faint groan of water imprisoned beneath. Then, slowly, other sounds came: a child's laughter, fading, the murmur of a song, the call of someone far away. He gasped. "There are people here." The hermit shook his head. "Not here. Long ago. The ice remembers. Water holds every sound it has ever touched, every word carried upon its current. In winter, those echoes rest within it, waiting for ears that will listen." Kato pressed his palm to the ice, trembling. The laughter grew clearer, and for an instant, he thought it was his own voice, years ago, chasing dragonflies in summer. Another sound followed his father's voice, calling him home. Tears blurred his vision. "It's him," he whispered. The hermit laid a hand on his shoulder. "Do not cling. The voices are gifts, not chains. Accept them, then let them go." Kato tried to breathe. The sounds rose, swirled, then faded like mist. All that remained was the soft groan of the stream beneath its frozen skin. He sat back, heart aching yet strangely lighter. If memory lives in ice, and snow, and trees, then he's not gone, is he? The hermit smiled faintly. Nothing is ever truly gone. It changes form, drifts like snow from branch to earth, melts to water, rises as mist. You will see your father in all these things, if you learn to look. Kato gazed across the frozen stream. The vast quiet no longer felt empty. It was full of voices, waiting, echoing, returning. For the first time since his father's passing, the silence did not frighten him. Chapter 5: The Lantern in the Snow. Several days passed after the storm, each morning bringing skies of pale silver. The forest seemed cleansed, its silence deeper yet gentler, as if the fury had been only a necessary breath before stillness. The hermit gave Kato a small bundle of food and pointed toward the valley. "You have learned what you came to learn. The path will guide you home." Kato bowed deeply. "I don't know how to thank you." The old man chuckled softly. "Thank the snow. Thank the silence. I was only the voice you happened to meet." Kato turned toward the long path back. His legs were steady now, though the snow rose nearly to his knees. Each step pressed a mark into untouched white, a trace of his passing. As twilight fell, fatigue gnawed at him. He feared he had lost the path. Shadows stretched long across the snow, and the forest seemed endless. Just as unease stirred, a faint glow appeared ahead. A lantern. Its small flame wavered within the glass, casting a circle of golden light on the snow. Beneath it stood a post, half buried, as if marking an old road. Kato approached, warmth blooming in his chest. The lantern seemed impossibly alive, as though someone had placed it there just for him. Beyond it, another glow flickered, then another, forming a trail through the snow-laden trees. He followed, lantern to lantern, each step easier than the last. The lights wound gently downhill until, at last, the forest parted. Below lay the village, roofs dusted in white, smoke curling from chimneys. Kato's throat tightened. Home. As he descended, villagers emerged, carrying more lanterns. They had set them along the path, guiding him as they once did for travelers returning during winter festivals. When they saw him, their faces brightened. "You're safe," a woman called. "We feared you were lost in the storm." Children ran ahead, their laughter piercing the still air. They tugged his sleeves, leading him toward the warmth of fire and family. Amid the crowd, his mother appeared, tears on her cheeks. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering his name. For the first time, Kato understood the silence of the forest was not only solitude. It was the space that made voices precious, that made reunion shine brighter. The lanterns in snow reminded him light exists because there is shadow, warmth because there is cold, belonging because there is wandering. Epilogue. Eternal quiet. Winter deepened, yet the memory of the forest remained within Kato. He often walked the edge of the woods, listening. The wind through bare branches no longer sounded empty. He heard echoes of his father, of his own childhood laughter, of the hermit's calm words. In the evenings, he helped set lanterns along the river and paths, honoring the departed, guiding spirits, and loved ones alike. Each flame reflected in the snow, multiplying until the village glowed like a constellation. Sometimes, when the night was still, Kato closed his eyes and felt the vast quiet wrap around him. He no longer feared it. Silence was not absence. It was the presence of snow upon earth, of breath in cold air, of memories folded gently into time. The forest would always whisper, whether through storm or stillness, through bamboo swaying or snow falling. And he, having walked its depths, would always hear. The snow would melt, return as streams, rise again as clouds, and fall once more. So too would silence and sound, loss and return. In that endless cycle, Kato found peace. The quiet forest in snowfall endured, eternal, not only in the mountains but in the hearts of those who listened. Petals drifting along the stream. Prologue. The first petal. Spring had come early that year. The air was scented with plum blossoms, and the warmth of the sun lingered on the mossy stones beside the stream. At the edge of the small mountain village, the water flowed. Gently, carrying the reflections of blue sky and the faint blush of petals drifting from trees overhead. A single petal landed on the surface, trembling as it spun. Its delicate shape moved with the current, gliding toward bends unseen. The children of the village leaned over the banks, laughing as they tossed twigs and petals of their own, racing them downstream. To them, the river was a companion, sometimes playful, sometimes solemn, always carrying stories from the mountains to the valleys below. But for one youth, the stream was more than a companion. Kazuya knelt at the bank, hands resting on his knees. He was 15, tall for his age, with a quiet gaze that seemed older than his years. While the other children shouted and ran, he remained still, watching the water's surface. The petal drifting ahead caught his attention. Something about the way it surrendered to the current stirred him. "Where will it go?" he murmured. His grandmother often said, "The river carries not only water but time itself." Each petal it takes is a moment leaving us, never to return. Kazuya wondered if by following the petals, he too might follow the course of time, might glimpse what lay ahead. The thought both frightened and beckoned him, like the distant call of a temple bell in twilight. The village lived in rhythm with the stream. Fields were irrigated from its waters, Festivals were held upon its banks, and its sound lulled children to sleep at night. Yet the river was not tame. In summer storms, it could rise violently, sweeping away bridges. In winter, it froze over, turning still and silent, as though guarding secrets beneath the ice. And now, in spring, the river whispered again through the drifting of blossoms that life was fleeting, yet beautiful in its impermanence. Kazuya stood. The petal had slipped around the bend, already beyond sight. Something in his heart stirred, a quiet promise. He did not know yet that the stream, and the petals upon it, would guide the path of his life. Chapter 1: The Village by the Stream. The village of Hoshimura lay nestled where the foothills gave way to flat lands. A scatter of thatched rooftops leaned close to the stream, their reflections shimmering on its surface. To visitors, it was a simple, almost unremarkable place. To its people, it was a world unto itself. Rich with stories etched into every stone path and cedar beam. Kazuya lived with his mother and grandmother in a modest house facing the stream. His father had died years ago in a flood, claimed by the same waters that nourished their rice fields. Perhaps that loss was why Kazuya felt the river's presence so keenly. For him, it was both wound and salve, memory and hope. The mornings began with the smell of wood smoke. Women rose early to prepare rice porridge while men readied tools for the day's work in the fields or mountains. Children fetched water from the river, their buckets sloshing as they ran. Life here was ordinary, yet in its ordinariness lay a quiet rhythm of wa, a harmony that made the village feel whole. In spring, festivals brought the community together. Lanterns were hung on bamboo poles, drums echoed from the shrine, and villagers dressed in faded but cherished festival robes. The children paraded along the stream, carrying small banners painted with blossoms, while elders recited poetry under the flowering trees. On such days, petals fell in great showers, covering roofs and paths, floating in bowls of sake, drifting endlessly on the water. To the villagers, the sight was not melancholy but celebratory, a reminder that beauty existed in passing things. Kazuya often lingered at the festival's edge, watching instead of joining. His grandmother sometimes teased him. "You see too much, my boy." Others laugh, "You ponder. You'll grow into a monk at this rate." But he smiled faintly and shook his head. He was not sure if he wanted to be a monk, a farmer, or anything at all. He only knew that something called him beyond the bend of the river, where the petals always disappeared. One afternoon, while helping his mother mend fishing nets, Kazuya asked, "Have you ever followed the stream all the way, Mother?" "To where it goes." She paused, the needle in her hand glinting in the light. "When I was younger, I dreamed of it. But the fields need tending, and the family needs hands. The river flows far, Kazuya. It may reach the sea or vanish underground. Who can say? But why ask?" He hesitated. "When I see the petals drifting, I feel as though they're calling me." His mother gave him a long look, then smiled gently. The petals drift, but the tree still stands. Remember that. Yet her words, though wise, did not quench his longing. The days stretched into weeks. The snowmelt swelled the stream, its voice louder, carrying twigs, blossoms, and sometimes whole branches. Kazuya walked its banks often, sometimes with the village boys who tried to fish with crude poles, sometimes alone, listening. One morning, before dawn, he rose quietly and slipped outside. Mist curled over the water, glowing pale in the first light. He followed the path along the bank, farther than he had ever gone. The village roofs vanished behind him. Only the sound of water and the occasional call of a crane kept him company. At a bend where willows trailed their branches in the current, Kazuya stopped. A cluster of petals spun together, caught in an eddy. Watching them, he felt a sudden certainty his life, too, was caught in an eddy. The village, though dear, bound him in circles. If he wished to grow, he must follow the stream, see where the petals went when they vanished from sight. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, he stood again at the water's edge. Petals drifted by in twos and threes, carrying light like tiny boats. He whispered, "Take me with you." Though no one heard, the current seemed to answer, carrying his words downstream. And so, the promise of departure began to form within him, a promise as gentle and inexorable as the river itself. Chapter 2: The Departure. The promise that had quietly taken root in Kazuya's heart grew stronger with each passing day. Though he did not yet speak of it openly, it shaped his gaze, his steps, even the way he lingered by the river in silence. To his grandmother and mother, his stillness was not unusual. He had always been a contemplative boy. But within, he felt a growing restlessness, like the river itself, always moving, always seeking. The Festival of Blossoms. That spring, the village held its annual Blossom Festival, a celebration of the cherry trees whose petals filled the air and blanketed the stream. On the morning of the festival, villagers gathered by the shrine at the heart of Hoshimura. Banners dyed in faded reds and blues swayed gently, and the smell of grilled rice cakes and sweet sake drifted through the air. Kazuya walked among the people, carrying offerings for the shrine with his mother. The laughter of children rang in his ears, and he watched their joy with a strange detachment, as though he were already half elsewhere. At the shrine steps, his grandmother placed her hands together in prayer. "May the river grant us another year of peace," she whispered. The priest intoned blessings, his voice rising with the drumbeats. Soon, the villagers released small lanterns onto the stream, each carrying a written wish. The water glittered with the glow of dozens of flames, drifting slowly downstream like a constellation. Kazuya lit a lantern of his own. On the thin paper, he wrote only a single line, "Let me find where the petals go." When he set it upon the water, it wavered, then steadied, drifting with the others toward the bend. His heart followed. The conversation with grandmother. That night, as they sat around the hearth, His grandmother noticed his distant gaze. "Kazuya," she said softly, "your eyes follow the river more than they follow the work before you." He hesitated. "Grandmother, have you ever wished to leave the village?" She smiled, lines deepening around her eyes. "When I was your age, yes. I thought the mountains beyond must hold wonders, and the sea must be endless. But life keeps us where we are needed." Kazuya lowered his head. "I feel as though I must go. Not forever, perhaps. But if I stay, I will always wonder." The fire crackled. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she sighed, neither disapproving nor approving, simply accepting. "The river calls some to remain, others to wander. If it is your time to follow it, do so with respect. Remember that wherever you go, the stream here still flows within you. Carry the village in your heart, even if your feet carry you away." Her words struck him deeply. For the first time, he felt as though his longing was not selfish, but part of something larger, like the current itself. Preparing to leave. Over the following days, Kazuya began to prepare in secret. He gathered what little he could carry: a small bundle of clothes, a pouch of rice his mother had dried, and his father's old walking staff, which had leaned in the corner of their home for years. One afternoon, as he walked the fields, his childhood friend Haru approached him. Haru was sturdy and cheerful, often quick to laugh. "You've been quiet lately," Haru said, narrowing his eyes. "Quieter than usual. What are you planning?" Kazuya tried to shrug it off, but Haru pressed. At last, Kazuya admitted, "I think I must follow the stream. To see where it leads." Haru stared, then burst out laughing, though not unkindly. "You? The boy who watches petals as if they whisper secrets. Perhaps you're meant for such a journey. But remember, the world beyond the village isn't gentle. Promise you'll come back and tell me what you see." Kazuya nodded. "I promise." The farewell at dawn. On the morning he chose to leave, dawn was only a faint glow beyond the mountains. Mist clung to the water's surface, and the air smelled of damp earth and blossoms. Kazuya bowed deeply before the family altar, touching his head to the floor in silent gratitude to his ancestors. His mother stood watching. She did not stop him. "Go, if your heart must," she said quietly. "The river took your father, but it may yet guide you to something greater. Return when the time is right." He embraced her, then turned to his grandmother. She placed a small cloth bundle in his hands. Inside was a smooth stone, polished by years of the stream's flow. "Keep this," she said. "When you hold it, remember the sound of home." Tears pricked his eyes, but he bowed deeply, unable to speak. At the riverbank, he took his first step beyond the edge of the village. The water murmured, carrying petals past him as though to lead the way. Behind, the rooftops of Hoshimura faded into mist. Ahead, the path curved with the stream, disappearing into the unknown. And so Kazuya began his journey, guided by the drifting petals. He did not yet know the faces he would meet, the trials he would endure, or the truths he would uncover. But with each step, he felt lighter, as though the river itself flowed within him, carrying him toward his destiny. Chapter 3 Along the River's Path. The path beyond Hoshimura was narrower than Kazuya had imagined. It twisted along the river's edge, sometimes little more than a deer trail worn into the grass. Yet as he walked, the stream's voice never left him. It babbled, whispered, and sometimes roared, as though urging him onward. The petals drifting on its surface had thinned since the height of spring, but now and then one appeared, spinning slowly on the current like a small lantern. Each time Kazuya saw one, he felt less alone. The first village beyond the hills. By the third day, he reached another settlement, smaller even than Hoshimura. The people there eyed him curiously as he entered, his bundle slung across his shoulder. Children ran to hide behind their mothers, peeking out with wide eyes. An elder approached, stooped yet steady, and asked his purpose. "I am following the river," Kazuya said with a bow. "Only for a place to rest tonight, if you permit." The elder studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "The river welcomes those who walk with humility. Stay, share our meal, and move on with the morning." That evening, Kazuya sat with the villagers around a fire. Their rice was poor, their houses patched with reed and bark, but their laughter was warm. A young girl asked him, "Where does the river go?" Kazuya smiled faintly. "That is what I hope to learn." The villagers murmured approval. For them, the river was lifeblood, but few dared to imagine beyond their narrow valley. His journey seemed strange, yet also gave them a spark of wonder. When he left at dawn, they pressed dried fish and a gourd of water into his hands. "May the stream carry you safely," they said. Meeting the wandering monk. Further along the path, where the river narrowed and quickened between rocky cliffs, Kazuya encountered a solitary traveler. The man wore patched robes, a broad straw hat shading his face. He leaned on a tall staff, walking with the rhythm of one who had long made the road his home. When their paths met, the monk raised his head. His eyes were keen yet gentle. "Young man," he said, "your steps carry both weight and lightness. Tell me, why do you walk alone?" Kazuya hesitated, then answered truthfully. "I follow the river to see where the petals go." The monk chuckled softly. "Ah, a simple reason, yet not so simple. The petals fall because they must, and the river carries them without regret. Do you seek where they end, or what they mean?" "I don't yet know," Kazuya admitted. The monk's eyes softened. "Then keep walking. The river will answer in its own time. Perhaps not in the place you expect, but in the silence between steps." They walked together for a while, sharing dried rice and quiet conversation. The monk spoke of temples far to the south, where gardens were raked into patterns of flowing water and stones. He spoke of mountain shrines where bells tolled only once a year, their echoes lingering across valleys. His words painted the world beyond Hoshimura more vividly than Kazuya had ever imagined. At a fork in the path, the monk bowed. Our roads part here. Remember, young one, do not only follow the water. Listen also to the stillness it carries. Then he was gone, his straw hat bobbing into the distance. The storm on the riverbank. Days later, dark clouds gathered. The air grew heavy, charged with the promise of rain. Kazuya pressed onward, but soon the skies broke, unleashing a torrent. The river swelled, frothing white against its banks. Thunder rolled across the mountains, and lightning split the sky. He sought shelter beneath a cluster of pines, but water seeped through, chilling him to the bone. In the distance, he saw villagers scrambling to secure their boats, shouting above the storm. One man slipped on the slick rocks, falling into the raging current. Without thinking, Kazuya dashed forward. The water was freezing, furious, but he grasped the man's arm, bracing himself against a tree root. With effort beyond his strength, he pulled until others rushed to help, hauling the man to safety. They collapsed together, gasping, rain plastering hair to their faces. The villagers looked at Kazuya with newfound respect. That night, though his clothes were still dampened by the storm, they gave him shelter. The rescued man bowed deeply. "You risked yourself for me, a stranger." "Why?" Kazuya answered simply, "The river carries us all. Today, it nearly carried you away. Tomorrow, it might be me. We must hold to each other, or we are lost." The man's eyes glistened. "You are young, but your heart knows truth." Reflections beside the fire. As the storm passed, leaving the river swollen but calmer, Kazuya sat by the fire in the villager's hut. He gazed into the flames, recalling the monk's words, "Listen also to the stillness." The rushing water outside seemed louder than ever, yet within that sound was a rhythm, rise and fall, like breath. Perhaps the stillness was not the absence of sound, but the pattern that held all things together. He closed his eyes and listened, not only to the storm's aftermath but to the quiet heartbeat beneath it. The fire's crackle, the drip of rain from the eaves, the slow breathing of those who slept nearby all joined the river's song. For the first time, he felt as though he truly belonged to the journey, not merely chasing after it. Departure once more. When the skies cleared, he resumed his path. The villagers gave him new sandals, woven from straw, to replace his worn ones. "May they carry you far," they said. He bowed deeply, gratitude swelling in his chest. The river glistened in the sunlight, swollen but serene. Along its surface floated not only petals, but leaves torn from the storm. They spun together, carried alike, no matter their origin. Watching them, Kazuya understood the river did not choose. It carried what it was given, with equal grace. So too, perhaps, must he carry all that came to him: joy, sorrow, strangers, friends. With this thought, he stepped forward once more, staff tapping the ground, heart steady with the current's flow. The path stretched endlessly ahead, winding with the stream. And though he could not see its end, he no longer feared it. Each step, each meeting, Each sound of water against stone was already its own answer. Chapter 4: The Silent Temple Garden. The river guided Kazuya farther than he had ever traveled before, winding through valleys and over low hills. The world beyond Hoshimura was larger, richer, and quieter than he had imagined. Villages were smaller and sparser, the forests deeper, and the mountains rose like silent sentinels over every bend. After many days of travel, Kazuya came upon a monastery nestled on a plateau above the river. Its roofs were covered in moss, its gardens raked in patterns that mirrored the flowing water. A stone path led to the entrance, lined with lanterns, each casting faint, still reflections in small pools of melted snow. The gatekeeper. At the entrance, an elderly monk greeted him. His robes were worn, his hands clasped before him in calm welcome. "Traveling far, young one," the monk said. "What brings you to the temple by the river?" "I follow the river," Kazuya replied. "I seek understanding. I do not know yet what I am seeking, but I know the stream has led me here." The monk nodded. "Then the river has guided wisely. Within these walls, you may learn to listen to what the water carries beyond the eye and ear." He motioned Kazuya inside. The temple was serene, silent but for the subtle sound of wind through bamboo and water trickling from a small stone basin. The gardens, though minimal, held an elegance beyond mere decoration. Each stone, each curve in the sand, each patch of moss seemed deliberately placed, as if the garden itself breathed. The lessons of stillness. Kazuya was assigned a small room in the temple and given simple duties sweeping the stone paths, carrying water from the stream, and tending to the garden's trees and shrubs. The monks spoke little, their instruction often silent or conveyed through action rather than words. At first, Kazuya struggled. He was impatient, distracted by the river and the petals that always beckoned beyond the gates. He tried to complete his chores quickly, anxious to be gone. One morning, an older monk observed him raking the garden. The lines were uneven, the sand disturbed. "Why do you rush?" the monk asked. Kazuya looked up. I must continue my journey. I cannot stay still for long." The monk tilted his head. "Do you think the river hurries when it moves over stones? Do you think it struggles against the obstacles in its path? Watch. Listen." He gestured to the garden. A gentle breeze stirred the bamboo shadows shifted across the moss and stones. A single cherry blossom petal fell, landing precisely on the curved edge of the sand. Kazuya watched, breath held. "The river and the petals," the monk said softly, "follow their course without demand. Learn from them. In stillness, you see movement more clearly than by haste." Reflections by the stone basin. That afternoon, Kazuya knelt by the temple's stone basin, watching the reflection of the sky and the surrounding trees. His own face appeared, framed by petals drifting on the water's surface. He realized how restless he had been, chasing the river as if the journey alone would bring him understanding. But here, in silence, he felt the river's presence more deeply than before. Its sound echoed within the temple's walls, in the curves of the garden stones, and within his own chest. He could see not only where the petals went but how they moved, how they interacted with the water, the wind, the sunlight. And he began to understand the journey was not merely about reaching a destination. It was about observing, listening, and participating in the quiet flow of life. Encounters in the garden. Over the following days, Kazuya met other travelers, monks seeking enlightenment, pilgrims visiting the temple, and wandering poets. They spoke little, yet each encounter left a trace, like ripples across the pond. One day, a young woman arrived, carrying a small scroll of poetry. She knelt in the garden and wrote lines on a piece of rice paper, each word deliberate and soft. Kazuya watched, mesmerized by the fluidity of her hand, the careful arrangement of ink, and the reverence with which she treated each stroke. "You observe much," she said, without looking up. "And yet, observing is only the beginning. What you take inside matters more than what you see outside." Her words resonated deeply. Kazuya bowed. I am learning." Slowly. She smiled faintly and returned to her writing, letting him watch in quiet companionship. He realized that stillness was not loneliness, it was shared, a communion with life, with water, with petals drifting along the stream. Evening under the lanterns. As the sun set, the temple gardens glowed with the soft light of hanging lanterns. Shadows lengthened, and the air smelled faintly of moss and blossoms. Kazuya sat beneath a cherry tree, its petals occasionally drifting onto his lap. He closed his eyes, breathing slowly, listening. The river below whispered. The stones held memory. The petals moved with the grace of impermanence. And for the first time, Kazuya felt his heart truly aligned with the flow of life, neither rushing ahead nor clinging behind. That night, as he slept in his small room, he dreamed of petals drifting endlessly on water, mountains rising beyond, and a river that carried both life and understanding. He awoke the next morning with calm resolve. The journey would continue, but now he carried with him a stillness born of observation and reflection. The river, the petals, the silent garden, they had taught him patience, presence, and harmony. Chapter 5: The Storm and the Stillness. The river flowed on, winding its way through valleys that grew narrower and darker. After his time in the temple, Kazuya felt renewed, yet he knew his journey was far from finished. The petals drifting on the water still beckoned him, reminding him that life's impermanence demanded not only quiet reflection but also endurance through chaos. It was early summer when the storm came. The gathering clouds. For days, the skies had grown heavy, thick with restless clouds. The air smelled of rain, and the river swelled with a weighty, impatient current. Kazuya walked along the banks, his steps echoing on stones slick with moisture, and he could feel the world holding its breath. Villagers hurried to secure their homes, gathering firewood and reinforcing roofs. "The storm will be fierce," they told him. "Stay sheltered. Do not wander the paths." But Kazuya, drawn by something he could not name, kept walking. He had spent weeks in stillness at the temple, and now it seemed the river demanded he learn from movement, from turmoil. That night, the first drops fell, heavy and insistent. By dawn, the world had vanished behind sheets of rain. The roar of water, the stream that once carried delicate petals now raged like a beast unleashed. Trees bent under the weight of the storm, branches snapped and tumbled into the rushing flood. The sound of water was no longer a whisper, it was a roar, deep and consuming, drowning out every other voice. Kazuya found himself caught between fear and awe. He clung to the trunk of a pine, his robes soaked, his hair plastered against his face. He had never known the river to be so merciless. Yet as he watched the water hurl debris downstream, logs, leaves, broken shards of bridges, he realized that this, too, was the river's nature. It was not always gentle, not a bearer of drifting petals. Sometimes it was destroyed, swept clean, carved new paths. And still, it flowed. Shelter in the mountain. By midday, Kazuya sought refuge in a cave carved into the mountainside. There, he lit a small fire and sat listening to the storm's fury outside. His thoughts swirled like the raging current. What is harmony, he wondered aloud, if the world can be so violent? He remembered the words of the monk in the temple. Do you think the river hurries? Do you think it struggles? The river did not struggle, it simply was, in its calm and in its rage. Perhaps harmony did not mean avoiding chaos but existing within it, finding stillness even as the world howled. Kazuya closed his eyes and breathed deeply, letting the roar of rain and thunder wash over him. Slowly, he no longer heard violence, but rhythm. Not destruction, but transformation. The fallen bridge. When the storm finally eased, Kazuya ventured down to the valley. The world had changed overnight. Trees lay uprooted, the soil was scarred, and the river was wider, darker, filled with silt. The old stone bridge across the river had collapsed, its center swept away by the torrent. On the far bank, villagers gathered, staring helplessly at the ruin. Among them was a child, calling out for her father, stranded on the opposite side. The man shouted back, unable to cross. The villagers were afraid to attempt a rescue, the current was still too strong. Kazuya's heart tightened. He felt the weight of choice. He was no hero, no warrior, but the river had taught him something: to listen, to move with its flow rather than against it. He studied the broken stones, the swirling eddies, the places where the current slowed. And then, tying a rope around his waist, he stepped into the water. The test of courage. The river was cold and relentless, pulling at him with invisible hands. Each step was a battle, yet Kazuya remembered the monk's lessons: do not fight the current, move with it, adjust, yield where you must. He let the water push him sideways, found footing where the stones were firm, and advanced in careful, fluid movements. Slowly, painfully, he reached the stranded man. Together, they secured the rope, and the villagers hauled them back, one by one, across the angry current. When at last the child was reunited with her father, the crowd wept and bowed toward Kazuya. But he shook his head. "It was not me," he said softly. "It was the river that showed me how to move. The stillness after the storm." In the days that followed, the villagers rebuilt their bridge and homes. Life resumed, though altered. The storm had swept away fields and trees, but it had also nourished the soil, left new channels for water to flow, and cleansed the air. Kazuya remained for a time, helping where he could. He learned from the villagers how they accepted loss and renewal as part of the cycle, how their songs carried sorrow and gratitude in the same breath. One evening, as the sun set over the newly quiet river, Kazuya sat alone on the bank. The petals had begun to fall again, late blossoms carried downstream as if nothing had changed. Yet he knew everything had changed, within him and around him. The petals drifted not in defiance of the storm, but because of it. The storm had stripped the branches, just as life's trials strip the heart. But still, beauty remained fragile, fleeting, carried onward. Kazuya smiled. For the first time, he understood that harmony was not the absence of conflict. It was the balance of all things, calm and chaos, creation and destruction, drifting petals and raging storms. And in that understanding, he felt stillness settle deep within him, unshaken by the river's roar. Chapter 6: The Return Flow. A path homeward. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in the valleys and in Kazuya's bones. For weeks, he had labored with the villagers, carrying stones, planting seeds, mending roofs. When the last bridge was rebuilt, the elders gathered around him. "You have done much for us," they said, bowing deeply. "But the river flows onward, and so must you." Kazuya knew it was true. The petals still drifted downstream, calling him to follow. His heart was lighter now, but it also carried the weight of everything he had seen: the temple's stillness, the storm's fury, the villagers' resilience. Each had shaped him, just as the river shaped its banks. And so, one clear morning, with a bundle of rice cakes and a staff carved from mountain pine, he began the journey home. The river's voice. The river had changed. Once narrow and gentle, it now ran wide, fed by new channels cut by the storm. Its voice was deeper, like the low hum of a drum echoing through the land. Kazuya walked alongside it, listening. The water gurgled, sighed, laughed against stones, whispered as it spread across shallows. Sometimes, when the wind carried petals onto its surface, he thought he heard words in its murmur, words not of command but of companionship. "You have learned," it seemed to say. "You have walked my calm, braved my storm. Now, carry me within you." Kazuya bowed to the flowing water. "I will." Villages along the way. As he traveled, he stopped in villages along the river's path. Some had been untouched by the storm, their fields golden with ripening grain. Others bore scars, broken walls, missing boats, patches of earth where houses once stood. But everywhere he went, he found the same resilience. Children laughed as they played beside the river, throwing petals into its current and chasing them downstream. Old women sang while weaving mats from reeds. Farmers bowed to the sky, grateful for the rain that had replenished their fields despite its destruction. Kazuya shared meals with them, helped mend tools, and listened to their stories. He spoke little of himself, but the villagers saw the calm in his eyes, the quiet strength in his presence. Some began calling him the traveler who listens to rivers. And always, at dusk, he walked to the water's edge to watch the petals drift. They were fewer now, the blossoms almost gone for the season, but even a single petal carried the weight of all he had learned. Memories returning. As the days passed, familiar hills rose in the distance. Pines he had known since boyhood crowned their slopes, and the scent of cedar drifted on the breeze. Kazuya felt his steps quicken, though his heart grew heavy with anticipation. It had been many months since he left his village. Would it still welcome him? Would his home feel the same? One evening, he camped beneath a willow whose branches touched the water. He dreamed of his mother's face, worn with years but kind, and of his younger brother running along the riverbank, laughing. He dreamed of petals drifting, circling endlessly, as if waiting for his return. When he awoke, dawn lit the world in pale gold. The river curved ahead, and beyond it lay the valley of his birth. The village by the stream. The village had changed, as all things must. Children he remembered were now taller, running errands with baskets in their arms. Houses had new roofs, and the riverbank was strengthened with stones to guard against floods. But the heart of the village was the same. Smoke rose from hearths, fishermen mended their nets, and old women sat spinning thread in the sun. The moment Kazuya stepped onto the familiar bridge, voices called out in astonishment. Kazuya. He has returned. People gathered, smiling, laughing, and clapping his back. His mother wept openly, pressing her hands against his face. His brother, no longer a boy but a young man, grinned with pride. "You have walked far," his mother said, "but the river has brought you home." The Festival of Petals. That very week, the village held its spring festival, when lanterns were set afloat on the river and petals were scattered to drift with them. Kazuya stood among the villagers at dusk, holding a small lantern painted with the symbol of a lotus. He placed it gently on the water, watching as it joined the others, their lights flickering like stars on the current. Petals, freshly plucked from branches, were cast upon the stream. They swirled around the lanterns, some sinking, some catching the light, all carried onward together. As Kazuya watched, he felt the weight of his journey settle into understanding. The petals were like lives, brief and delicate, drifting side by side, sometimes separating, meeting again, all borne by the same endless river. The villagers sang old songs of gratitude, their voices rising into the night air. Kazuya closed his eyes and let the harmony surround him. The return flow. In the weeks that followed, Kazuya resumed the rhythms of village life, helping in the fields, tending the riverbanks, listening to elders' stories. Yet he was not the same youth who had once left in search of meaning. Now, when he stood by the stream, he did not see only water. He saw the temple's still pond, the storm's fury, the villagers' resilience, and the petals drifting unendingly. He saw the harmony of all things: stillness and motion, sorrow and joy, endings and beginnings. And he understood that his journey had never truly been about leaving. It was about learning to return again and again to the flow of life, to the river that carried all things forward. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Kazuya whispered to the stream, "I am home." The water answered with a gentle murmur, and a single late petal drifted past, glowing in the twilight. Epilogue: petals without end. The river in spring. Spring returned, as it always did. The mountains shed their snow, streams rushed into rivers, and blossoms adorned the branches of cherry trees once more. The village by the stream is prepared for another season of planting, fishing, and gathering. Kazuya rose one morning to find the air filled with fragrance. From the hilltop behind his home, he looked down upon the river. Its surface gleamed beneath the sun, scattered with the first petals of the year. They drifted slowly, each one spinning in its own way, yet all drawn into the same current. Kazuya smiled, for he had come to see his own life reflected in them, not separate, not permanent, but part of something vast and eternal. A child's question. That day, children played by the stream, tossing petals into the current to see which would float the farthest. One small boy tugged at Kazuya's sleeve. "Why do the petals fall?" he asked, his eyes wide. Kazuya crouched beside him. "Because their time has come. The tree has given them to the river." "Do they die?" Kazuya looked at the water, where petals drifted side by side, shining in the sun. "They change. They become part of the river, part of the earth, part of everything that grows again. Nothing truly disappears." The boy thought about this, then released another petal and watched it float. His laughter joined the sound of the river, bright and light as spring wind. Evening by the stream. That evening, villagers gathered once more at the riverbank. It was not a festival, not a ceremony, simply a habit born from generations to sit by the stream and listen. Elders spoke of past floods and famines, of ancestors who had walked the same fields. Women hummed songs of planting. Children chased fireflies. And in the midst of it all, petals drifted by, their pale glow visible even in twilight. Kazuya sat quietly, the sounds surrounding him. He remembered the hermit's words at the mountain hut: "The world will always whisper to you, if you are willing to be silent enough to hear it." Now he heard it. Not only in the river, but in the villagers' voices, in the wind through reeds, in the laughter of children. Life was one great flowing harmony. The lantern dream. That night, Kazuya dreamed again of lanterns. He saw them floating downstream, their lights never dimming, even as petals swirled around them. The river stretched on forever, carrying lanterns, carrying blossoms, carrying voices. In the dream, he placed his own lantern on the water. But this time, it did not drift away. Instead, it joined the others and became part of the endless stream of light. When he awoke, his heart was calm. He understood now his journey was not about finding meaning in distant places. It was about becoming part of the great flow, about adding his own quiet light to the river that carried all lives onward. The endless return. Seasons turned. Summer brought dragonflies and rice paddies shimmering in the heat. Autumn scattered golden leaves across the riverbank. Winter lay its hush over the village, only for spring to return with blossoms and petals. Each year, Kazuya stood by the river when the petals began to fall. Each year, he remembered his journey, the temple's silence, the storm's roar, the faces of those he had met. He carried them within him, as the river carried petals. And he taught the children of the village to watch, to listen, to let the petals speak. Petals without end. One dawn, as the sun rose over the water, Kazuya stood on the familiar bridge. Petals streamed beneath him, countless, unending. He breathed deeply, feeling the cool air, the scent of blossoms, the murmur of the river. He whispered to the current, "Carry them well." And the river did. It always had. The petals drifted on, joining the flow that reached beyond the village, beyond the valleys, beyond what any eye could see. They became part of oceans, clouds, rains, roots, blossoms yet to come. So it was with life. So it would always be. The petals never ended. Evening shadows in the garden. Prologue. The garden at dusk. The garden was quiet, drenched in the soft glow of the evening sun. Shadows stretched across stone paths, curling around moss-covered lanterns, sliding along the edges of carefully raked gravel. Kato stood at the entrance, his hands tucked into his sleeves, inhaling the subtle fragrance of pine, plum, and damp earth. The village behind him had grown still. Lamps glimmered behind paper windows, children's laughter now a memory carried on the wind. But here, in the garden, time seemed to slow, bending around the curve of every stone and the arc of every branch. He stepped onto the path. Gravel crunched softly beneath his sandals, a gentle counterpoint to the rustling of bamboo leaves swaying in the evening breeze. Kato had walked this path countless times as a boy. Yet each step brought a new sense of discovery, as though the garden remembered him, and he, in turn, remembered it. A small pond lay ahead, still as glass. Koi glided beneath the surface, barely disturbing the mirrored reflection of the maple trees overhead. The red and gold of autumn leaves hung suspended in the water, as if they had paused mid-fall to watch him. Kato knelt beside the pond. His reflection shimmered, joined by the flutter of falling leaves and the faint shadow of clouds overhead. He whispered a greeting to the garden, uncertain whether it would answer, and felt a shiver of anticipation. Evening in the garden was not merely the absence of sunlight, it was a presence, palpable and patient. Every stone, every branch, every ripple seemed to breathe with quiet intent. Chapter 1: The Path Between Stones. Kato rose and continued along the stone path. Stepping carefully between larger rocks, mindful not to disturb the moss that grew like soft carpets on either side. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet leaves and earth. Somewhere nearby, a small stream murmured, its voice gentle yet persistent. He noticed small details he had never truly observed before: a butterfly frozen on a branch, wings damp with dew. The subtle pattern of lichen on a boulder, the faint sound of insects returning to shelter in the shadows of shrubs. Each detail felt like a secret the garden offered only to those willing to slow their pace and open their senses. A bronze lantern, weathered with age, stood at a bend in the path. Its glass was fogged with evening moisture, and inside, the faint glow of a candle flickered, throwing dancing shadows across the gravel. Kato paused, bowing slightly to the small shrine beside it. A single white chrysanthemum lay at its base, dew still clinging to its petals. As he moved on, a small creature darted from under a rock, a red fox, its fur bright against the deepening shadows. It watched him for a moment, then disappeared between bamboo stalks, leaving behind only the faintest footprints in the soft earth. Kato followed the winding path, stepping over low bridges spanning trickling streams, crossing under arches of interwoven branches. Each segment of the garden offered new perspectives: a rock shaped like a sleeping turtle, a pond with water lilies just beginning to close for the evening, a pine tree that bent gently toward the path as if bowing to him. The sounds of the village faded entirely now. All that remained was the garden itself, alive in its own rhythm. The rustle of leaves, the murmur of water, the occasional crack of a twig underfoot, all were notes in a symphony of quiet. At a small clearing, Kato paused again. Here, the stones were arranged in a circle, their surfaces smoothed by centuries of wind and rain. In the center lay a moss-covered basin, water still and dark, reflecting the first hints of twilight. He knelt and dipped his hand into the water. It was cold, yet soothing, grounding him in the moment. Above, the shadows of trees stretched long and slow, brushing the edges of his vision like a gentle caress. A subtle sound reached him then, a whisper of wind moving through bamboo. It was almost imperceptible, yet in the hush of the garden, it carried a message he could not fully grasp. He stood, brushing gravel from his sleeves. "I am listening," he murmured, and for the first time that evening, he felt the garden answer him, not in words, but in presence. The path continued, winding through shadow and light, and Kato knew he would follow it until the garden had revealed all it could. Every stone, every lantern, every leaf seemed to guide him, teaching him patience, presence, and the beauty of stillness. As the evening deepened, Kato walked on, each step a meditation, each breath a reflection. He was alone, yet surrounded by life, by memory, and by the quiet power of the garden's enduring spirit. Chapter 2: The Old Pavilion. The garden's path curved gently upward, leading Kato toward a small hill where the air felt cooler, heavier with the scent of pine and earth. At the crest, he discovered a pavilion, ancient and simple, its wooden beams darkened by time, its roof dusted with fallen leaves. He paused at the threshold, resting his hands on the smooth wooden rail. The pavilion overlooked a section of the garden he had never noticed before, a pond ringed with stones. Lilies now folded for the night, and a cluster of bamboo that swayed with the evening breeze. Inside, the pavilion was empty save for a low wooden table and a pair of cushions, the floor worn smooth by generations of visitors. Kato knelt upon one cushion, bowing his head in quiet reverence. The garden had offered him many lessons already: stillness, observation, the delicate balance of shadow and light, but this place seemed to promise something deeper, something older than the stones themselves. He rested his palms on the table, tracing the grain of the wood. Each ridge and groove told a story, the slow passage of seasons recorded in its fibers. Outside, a small wind stirred, carrying the whisper of leaves through the open windows, mingling with the distant croak of a frog near the pond. Kato's gaze drifted across the garden. He could see the path he had walked earlier, each stone catching the last rays of sunlight. Shadows stretched long, merging and separating like silent dancers. The lanterns, now unlit, cast faint silhouettes against the walls, reminding him that light and darkness were not opposites but partners in a delicate balance. A subtle sound drew his attention, a soft patter, like tiny feet across the wooden floor. Kato turned and glimpsed a small sparrow perched at the edge of the pavilion, tilting its head curiously at him. It chirped once, and he felt a warmth in his chest. Even the smallest life in this garden seemed to acknowledge his presence, as though welcoming him into its timeless rhythm. He leaned closer to the open window, peering at a stone basin below the pavilion. Water, clear and calm, reflected the sky now deepening into violet. A single leaf floated on the surface, circling slowly before settling near the edge. Kato wondered how many leaves had passed this way over the years. How many visitors had knelt at the pavilion, listening in their own ways to the quiet of the garden. As the shadows lengthened, he noticed a small shrine tucked beneath a cluster of bamboo. Its roof was low, almost hidden, and the front was adorned with a simple rope and a few offerings: coins, a folded slip of paper, a single chrysanthemum. Kato approached it reverently. He brushed away a thin layer of fallen leaves and traced the carvings on the shrine's wooden frame, characters that spoke of peace, patience, and quiet devotion. He bowed deeply, feeling the weight of generations who had come before him. "I am here," he whispered, "to listen and to learn." The air seemed to respond. A faint rustle of bamboo leaves, a distant sigh of the wind, a ripple across the pond, each a note in the garden's unspoken symphony. Kato felt that he had entered a space beyond ordinary time, where past, present, and future converged in quiet harmony. He remained in the pavilion until the sky deepened into twilight, watching the first stars emerge above the trees. Lanterns along the paths flickered as the evening light waned, and he realized that the garden itself was alive in ways he had only begun to understand. Kato rose and stepped onto the path once more, following the curve of the garden stones. The pavilion receded behind him, yet its lessons remained the patient waiting of the shadows. The gentle guidance of wind and water, the enduring presence of life even in stillness. As he walked, he reflected on the garden's quiet power. It was not only a place of beauty, but a teacher of perspective, showing that attention, reverence, and care could transform ordinary moments into something sacred. Even the smallest stone, the faintest shadow, carried meaning when observed with intention. The path led him deeper into the bamboo grove, where the light grew dim and the air felt cooler. He paused beside a stream that wound through the garden, listening to the faint trickle of water over smooth stones. The sound was subtle yet constant, reminding him that even in quiet, life moved forward, persistent and patient. Kato knelt by the stream, letting his fingers brush the water. The reflection of the first moonlight appeared, a silver arc among the shadows. He realized that the garden's lessons were cumulative patience, observation, stillness, and reverence. Each step, each breath, each moment of attention built upon the last, weaving a tapestry of understanding that could not be rushed. A gentle breeze stirred the bamboo, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Kato inhaled deeply, feeling a sense of calm he had never known in the village. Here, among stones, water, and shadows, he began to understand the essence of the garden. It was not merely a physical place, but a living meditation. An invitation to align one's heart with the rhythms of nature. Night fell fully, and Kato found a spot near the pavilion to rest. The stars above twinkled faintly through the branches, and he felt the quiet envelop him. The garden had offered him more than beauty. It had begun to teach him the art of listening, the importance of stillness, and the gentle power of patience. As he closed his eyes, he could hear the subtle symphony of life around him, the rustle of leaves, the trickle of water, the distant call of a night bird. The shadows moved with the moonlight, and he felt connected to the continuum of the garden's existence. For the first time, Kato felt the evening not as an end but as a presence, a quiet companion that would guide him through both shadow and light. Chapter 3: Shadows in the Lantern Light. The sun sank lower, and the garden changed once again. Shadows lengthened and shifted, slipping silently across stone paths and over moss-covered lanterns. The air grew cooler, carrying the subtle scent of evening dew and distant pine. Kato walked slowly, letting the garden guide him. Each step was deliberate, each breath attentive to the subtle changes around him. Lanterns along the paths flickered to life, casting gentle pools of light. The glow reflected in the ponds, making the water appear to shimmer with ghostly silver patterns. Shadows danced across walls, stones, and leaves, stretching and merging as if in conversation. Kato paused frequently, observing how the light seemed to animate the garden, turning ordinary shapes into fleeting figures of quiet elegance. A soft wind rustled through the bamboo, producing a whisper that seemed almost human. Kato crouched to listen, his hands resting on the cold stone of a lantern base. The voice of the garden, he realized, was not one of sound but of perception of attention and stillness. Even the faintest motion held meaning. He moved toward a small clearing where the lantern's glow overlapped with moonlight beginning to pierce the twilight. Here, shadows pooled and shifted, forming patterns across the ground. A fox emerged, delicate and silent, stepping through the dim light as if guiding him further. Kato followed, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of light and darkness. In the quiet, he began to notice subtle signs of life: the shimmer of a frog beneath a lily pad, the rustle of leaves where a small bird had taken flight. The faint trace of wind moving across the surface of the pond. Each element, though minor alone, contributed to the garden's symphony of the evening. Kato's attention lingered on a single stone bridge, half hidden beneath overhanging branches. Its surface was rough with age, yet worn smooth where many had walked before him. He crossed it slowly, feeling the texture beneath his fingertips and imagining the countless footsteps that had pressed against it. Shadows from nearby lanterns stretched across the bridge, merging with those cast by overhanging branches. For a moment, the garden seemed suspended in an eternal evening, a place where light and shadow coexisted in perfect harmony. Sitting by the bridge, he closed his eyes and listened. The whisper of wind through bamboo, the soft trickle of a distant stream. The subtle hum of insects beginning their nocturnal symphony all blended into a quiet melody. In that stillness, Kato felt his heart open, recognizing the deep patience and rhythm of the garden. Chapter 4: The Whispering Trees. As night deepened, Kato wandered into a dense grove of bamboo and pines. Moonlight spilled through the gaps in the canopy, painting pale silver lines across the forest floor. The garden here felt older, untouched by human hands for centuries, yet maintained in delicate balance. A faint path guided him to a circle of ancient trees, their trunks wide and gnarled with age. Leaves whispered in the wind, creating a chorus that seemed to echo across time. Kato pressed a hand against one trunk, feeling the textured bark beneath his fingers. It was as if the trees themselves held memory, recording the footsteps of all who had passed this way. Through the bamboo, he glimpsed a small stone shrine, nearly hidden in shadow. He approached reverently, noting offerings left by unknown hands: a single coin, a folded piece of paper, a wilted flower. Kneeling before it, Kato bowed, letting the silence fill him. The grove seemed to respond, wind rising briefly, then fading, leaving only the gentle rustle of leaves and the faint murmur of distant water. He listened carefully. In the shifting patterns of moonlight and shadow, he thought he heard echoes of voices, children playing, a mother's laughter, a distant song. They were not present, yet they were remembered, carried in the subtle movements of the trees and the soft sigh of the wind. Kato realized that the garden preserved not only life but memory, holding moments that had passed yet still existed in quiet form. A breeze brushed his cheek, bringing the scent of pine resin and cold earth. He inhaled deeply, grounding himself in the present, yet feeling connected to the continuum of lives that had intersected here. The trees seemed to speak, observe, listen, respect. He wandered deeper into the grove, pausing to examine the smallest details: the curve of a bamboo shoot, the shadow of a stone lantern across moss, the glimmer of moonlight on a leaf. Each observation reminded him that beauty and meaning were found in subtlety, in noticing rather than controlling. At the heart of the grove, he found a small pond, its surface mirror-like under the moon. Koi moved slowly beneath, ripples creating shifting patterns of light and shadow. Kato knelt, reflecting on all he had seen that evening: the lanterns, the pavilion, the bridges, the whispers in the bamboo. Each element was part of a larger whole, a living meditation in stone, water, and leaf. Here, in the soft moonlight, Kato felt a profound sense of connection. Not just to the garden, but to the many lives that had walked its paths, to the wind, the water, the stones themselves. The evening shadows were no longer simply shapes, they were teachers, guiding him toward understanding the quiet, enduring rhythm of life. As he rose to leave, the fox appeared again, stepping silently beside him. Its eyes met his, and for a moment, Kato felt a bridge between human and nature, between presence and memory. The garden had shown him patience, attention, and the depth of stillness. It had taught him that every shadow, every ripple, every whisper was a thread in the tapestry of existence. He walked back along the winding path, shadows lengthening and merging, lanterns flickering gently, bamboo and pines swaying in the night breeze. Kato understood that the garden's lessons were not just for the evening, but for all moments of life, an invitation to see, hear, and feel with quiet attentiveness. Chapter 5: Moonlight over the pond. The moon rose fully over the garden, casting a serene, silver light that transformed every stone, leaf, and pond surface into a quiet spectacle of shadow and reflection. Kato walked slowly, feeling the gentle pull of the night around him. Each step was deliberate, his sandals barely making a sound on the moss-covered stones. He returned to the pond near the old pavilion. The water mirrored the moonlight perfectly, broken only by the soft ripples of koi swimming beneath the surface. Kato knelt by the edge, brushing a few stray leaves from the water. The reflection seemed to ripple not only with movement but with memory, carrying images of his past visits to the garden, the laughter of friends. The gentle guidance of elders, the warmth of sunlight on his face. The garden's quiet had taught him patience, but here, in the silver glow of moonlight, it offered something deeper perspective. He saw that the stones, the lanterns, the flowing water, and the trees were not merely parts of a physical landscape. They were teachers, preserving lessons of stillness, harmony, and attention to life's subtleties. A gentle breeze stirred the bamboo along the far edge of the pond. Their long shadows stretched over the water, weaving a pattern that seemed almost intentional. Kato noticed how even the smallest details contributed to the harmony of the whole, each movement part of a living meditation. He imagined the generations who had walked these paths before him, each step leaving a subtle imprint on the garden. Their presence lingered in the stones, the water, and the very air. Kato felt humbled, realizing that his own footsteps were now part of this continuum, woven into the quiet rhythm of the garden. A fox appeared at the pond's edge, emerging from shadow as silently as it had guided him in the past. Its fur glimmered silver in the moonlight, eyes bright and calm. Kato watched it, sensing the silent understanding shared between them. Nature and human, present and memory, they converged in this moment, inseparable and enduring. He knelt, offering a small bow to the fox, to the moonlit pond, and to the garden itself. The simple gesture felt profound, an acknowledgement of connection, respect, and gratitude. In return, the garden seemed to exhale a soft rustle of leaves, a ripple across the pond, a sigh of wind moving through the trees. Kato rose, feeling the deep peace that comes only after true attention and reverence. The moonlight illuminated every corner, every shadow, yet there was no fear here, only understanding. He realized that the garden had guided him toward an awareness that extended beyond its walls. Into all moments of life: patience, stillness, attentiveness, and presence. Epilogue: Eternal evening. Kato walked back through the winding stone paths, lanterns flickering faintly in the moonlight. Each step felt lighter, yet grounded, as though he were carrying both the garden and its lessons within him. The village lay ahead, quiet in the late night, but he no longer felt entirely separate from it. The garden's rhythm, patience, and attention now resided in his heart. He understood that stillness was not absence, and silence was not emptiness. Every shadow, every reflection, every whisper of wind was alive, carrying meaning if one was willing to listen. Seasons would change. Spring would bring blossoms, summer would fill the garden with insects. And light, autumn would paint the leaves in gold and red, and winter would return the hush of snow. Yet the lessons of the garden: quiet presence, reverent observation, patient attention, were eternal. Kato lit a small lantern at the edge of the village path, its glow mingling with the moonlight. He paused, reflecting on the evenings he had spent in the garden: the pavilion, the stone paths, the pond, the shadows, the whispers of wind and water. He understood now that life itself was like the garden, layers of presence and memory, movement and stillness, shadow and light. He watched the lantern flicker against the evening shadows, thinking of all the voices, human and natural, that had guided him. His father's teachings, the wisdom of elders, the quiet of the stones, the ripple of the water, the rustle of bamboo, all these now resided within him. Kato realized he could walk through the world carrying the garden in his heart, perceiving subtle beauty in every moment, listening to the whispers of life around him. Evening, shadow, moonlight, they were not merely phenomena, but reminders of the delicate balance and enduring harmony that connected all things. As he turned toward his home, he felt the quiet settle around him like a gentle cloak. The garden's lessons were not bound by its walls, they were everywhere he chose to see, hear, and feel. And in the eternal evening of his heart, Kato found peace. The moon watching the silent village. Prologue. The village in moonlight. The village lay quiet beneath the full moon. Roofs of dark wood reflected silver light, and the narrow streets, cobbled with stones worn smooth over centuries, seemed to shimmer with a pale glow. Smoke curled lazily from a few chimneys, blending with the mist that had begun to rise from the fields surrounding the village. Kato stood at the edge of the path leading in. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rice paddies, pine, and the earth after a recent rain. The moon hung low, full and luminous, as if it had paused in its nightly arc to watch over the sleeping village. He felt a chill, not of fear, but of awe. Everything seemed suspended in perfect stillness. The houses, though modest, spoke of care and continuity, sliding wooden doors, paper windows, small gardens carefully tended. The village was not abandoned, yet it was silent, holding its breath in reverence for the night. Kato took a step forward. Each stone underfoot made a soft sound that seemed unusually loud in the hush. He walked slowly, noticing the details: the curve of a roof, the pattern of lichen on stones, the gentle sway of bamboo leaves. The moonlight caught on a stream running through the village, turning the water into a silver ribbon. It wound past small wooden bridges, reflecting both the night sky and the shadows of the surrounding trees. Kato paused on one bridge, leaning over to watch the water move silently below. He imagined the generations of villagers who had crossed this same bridge, each step echoing softly, leaving invisible traces in the air and the stones. He realized that the village itself was a living memory, held together by continuity, care, and quiet attention. A lone fox appeared at the edge of the path, its fur pale in the moonlight. It glanced at him, then disappeared into the shadows of a bamboo grove, leaving only the faintest footprints. Kato followed at a distance, feeling the pull of curiosity and the quiet guidance of instinct. Every detail of the night seemed to speak. The wind whispered through trees, carrying the subtle scent of blossoms and pine needles. The reflection of the moon in the stream shimmered, fragmented by gentle ripples. Even the silence was not empty, it hummed with life, subtle and persistent. Kato paused in the center of the village square, bowing slightly to the moon above. "I am here," he whispered, "to see, to listen, to understand." The moon, full and eternal, seemed to reply with a pale glow that filled the village, touching every roof, stone, and shadow. Chapter 1: The Narrow Streets. Kato moved along the narrow streets, following the curve of the cobblestones. The village felt like a labyrinth of quiet, where every turn revealed a new scene: a courtyard with a small pond, koi moving slowly beneath the silver reflection of the moon. A wooden gate with creeping ivy, a lantern perched on a stone pedestal, its glow muted in the moonlight. He noticed the delicate sounds around him: the distant croak of a frog, the rustle of leaves, the gentle trickle of water from a hidden spout. Each sound was subtle, yet together they formed a chorus that spoke of continuity and life beyond human speech. Passing under an archway of bamboo, Kato saw the interplay of light and shadow dance along the stones. Shadows shifted as the moon moved, intertwining with the shapes of the buildings. He realized that each element: the stone, the water, the plant, the roof was part of a larger composition, and that his presence was only one thread in this tapestry of quiet harmony. He paused at a small shrine tucked beside a cluster of houses. Its roof was simple, and offerings of coins and flowers rested before it. Kato knelt, bowing deeply. The air felt charged with unseen presence, the weight of reverence carried across centuries. He sensed the echoes of those who had come here before, whispering in their silence patience, attentiveness, care. Rising, Kato continued along the streets. A cat padded silently along a wall, its eyes reflecting the moonlight. He followed the gentle curves of the streets, noticing how every corner seemed to frame a scene, a small detail of life frozen yet alive. Near the edge of the village, he came upon a small garden tucked between two houses. The stones were carefully arranged, and a low fence of bamboo framed the space. Kato stepped inside, feeling the soft crunch of gravel beneath his feet. A pond mirrored the moon, and he realized how even small spaces could hold a universe of detail and quiet wonder. He knelt beside the pond, touching the water's surface. Ripples spread slowly, reflecting the moonlight in shifting patterns. Kato thought about the passage of time, the generations who had tended this garden, and the countless nights like this one that had passed before him. He felt both small and part of something vast, a living continuum. A soft wind stirred the leaves, and he heard it clearly in the stillness, a whisper that seemed to say, "Observe. Listen. Be present." Kato rose, brushing gravel from his sleeves, and continued down the narrow streets. Each step, each glance, each breath was a lesson in patience, attention, and quiet harmony. He understood, finally, that the village itself was a teacher, and the moon above its eternal witness. Chapter 2: The Lanterns of Memory. The narrow streets of the village began to widen as Kato moved further from the center. Along the edges of the paths, old houses stood in quiet dignity, their wooden beams darkened with age. Sliding doors were closed for the night, yet from behind paper windows, faint glimmers of candlelight escaped, casting soft patterns on the walls. Kato noticed the lanterns first. Small, carefully crafted, some bronze, some paper, some carved from stone, each placed at doorways, steps, or garden corners. They glowed faintly, even under the moonlight, as if holding within them the accumulated care and attention of generations. He paused beside one lantern, brushing a finger across its cool surface. The carved symbols seemed to hum with memory. Each lantern told a story. The copper lantern by the temple gate had dents from years of wind and rain, yet its flame, when lit, cast a warm light that softened the darkness. The paper lantern outside a small tea house bore delicate brush strokes, each line a record of hands that had painted, folded, and hung it with devotion. Kato realized that the light of the lanterns was more than illumination, it was a bridge to the past. Each glow carried the memory of countless evenings, of footsteps, laughter, prayers, and quiet reflection. The village, silent now, had once been alive with life, and these lanterns bore witness to it, preserving the essence of those moments. He followed a stone path toward a small temple at the edge of the village. The temple's wooden doors were closed, but the faint flicker of lanterns along its eaves revealed the carved details of the roof. Kato knelt at the steps, bowing to the temple and the moon above. The stone steps were worn smooth, and the air held a scent of incense long extinguished. In the temple courtyard, more lanterns hung from trees and eaves, their reflections shimmering in a small koi pond at the center. Kato leaned over the edge, watching the water ripple as a breeze passed. Moonlight mingled with the lantern glow, creating a dance of silver and gold across the pond's surface. He thought of all the people who had knelt here before him, lighting lanterns, offering prayers, leaving messages of hope, gratitude, and remembrance. A soft wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint echo of voices. Kato imagined children laughing on summer evenings, elders sharing stories beneath the same trees, and travelers pausing to rest on the stone benches. Though the village was silent tonight, these echoes lingered, preserved in the lantern's gentle light and in the stones themselves. Kato walked along the path leading from the temple to the river that bordered the village. Lanterns on stone pedestals guided him, their flickering flames steady against the dark water. The river reflected both the moon and the lanterns, doubling their light and creating a magical corridor of silver and gold. He felt as though he was walking through a bridge between past and present, between memory and life. At the riverbank, a small bridge arched gracefully over the water. Kato paused at its center, looking down at the reflection of the moon and the lanterns. He noticed a single leaf drifting on the surface, circling slowly before coming to rest near the edge. The motion reminded him that even in the quietest places, life persisted, subtle and deliberate, like the turning of seasons. The village lanterns seemed to whisper to him now, each flicker of light carrying a message: observe, remember, respect. He closed his eyes, feeling the continuity of generations, the presence of those long gone, and the gentle guidance of the village itself. Kato knelt again at the edge of the river, letting his hand skim the surface. The water was cold, but steady, grounding him. He felt the rhythm of the village's heart, the slow, patient pulse of life, memory, and care. Each lantern, each stone, each ripple in the river was a note in this quiet symphony, a song of enduring presence. As he rose, the moonlight deepened, casting long, serene shadows across the path. Kato understood that the village's power lay not in motion or spectacle but in its patient stillness, in the small acts of care that accumulated over time. The lanterns hung with attention, the stones placed with intention, the gardens tended gently. He walked slowly, following the river's curve, lanterns flickering beside him. Each step reinforced the lesson the village offered: that presence, care, and attentiveness were as vital as movement, that the past and present were inseparable. And that in quiet observation, one could find connection, meaning, and peace. The river widened slightly, and Kato found a small clearing beside its bank where lanterns hung in clusters from trees. He sat on a stone, absorbing the warmth of the light, the shimmer of the moon on water, the whispers of wind in the leaves. Here, the village's history, its life, and its quiet energy felt most present. He realized that even in apparent silence, the village spoke clearly to those willing to see and listen. Hours passed. The lanterns dimmed slightly with the cool night, yet they remained steadfast. Kato closed his eyes, feeling the continuity of generations, the enduring rhythm of the village, and the lessons carried in its light. He understood that memory and presence could be cultivated, preserved, and shared, and that even a silent village was never truly empty. Rising, Kato continued along the river bank, following the lantern-lit path back toward the heart of the village. Each step felt deliberate, connected, and filled with purpose. The lanterns glowed softly beside him, as though guiding him not just through the village, but through the understanding of its quiet soul. Chapter 3: The Silent Shrine. Leaving the riverbank behind, Kato followed a narrow trail that curved away from the lantern-lit paths. The ground here was softer, muffled by fallen pine needles. The air grew cooler, and the village lights faded until only the moon accompanied him. At the edge of the forest stood a small shrine, half hidden by tall bamboo and cedar. Its wooden torii gate leaned slightly with age, moss clinging to its base. The shrine itself was modest, a single wooden structure with a thatched roof, its timbers darkened by centuries of weather. Yet the stillness that surrounded it gave it a quiet authority, as though the forest itself bowed in respect. Kato stepped through the torii and felt the change immediately. The air seemed to deepen, heavy with silence that was not empty but alive. He paused at the stone basin where villagers once cleansed their hands. The water was still and cold, reflecting the pale moon above. Kato cupped some in his palms, letting it run through his fingers, as if to purify not only his skin but his wandering thoughts. Before the shrine stood a single stone lantern. Its flame was unlit, yet the moon's light gave it a faint glow. Kato placed his hands together and bowed. He did not speak. Words felt unnecessary here. The act of being present, of breathing with the forest and the shrine, was enough. As he knelt, a breeze moved through the bamboo, creating a sound like a low whisper. It reminded him of voices too soft to hear, like the breath of ancestors or the prayers of those who had stood here long ago. He listened closely, heart attuned to every rustle and creak. The forest, the shrine, and the moon seemed to speak in their own language, patient, enduring, timeless. He thought of the villagers who once visited this shrine, bringing offerings of rice, sake, or fresh flowers. Perhaps they prayed for harvests, for health, for the well-being of their families. Their prayers, Kato realized, had not vanished with time. They lingered here, woven into the silence like threads of unseen cloth. Kato rose and circled the shrine. Behind it, a small grove of cedar trees enclosed the space, their roots entwined with ancient stones. Some stones bore carvings worn nearly smooth by weather, yet their shapes hinted at old guardians, foxes, lions, spirits carved to protect the place. He touched one, feeling the cool stone pulse faintly, as if echoing with the touch of countless hands before him. The shrine was quiet, but within that quiet lay a profound presence. Kato felt humbled, a visitor not only to a physical place but to the continuum of lives, prayers, and devotions that had sustained it. The moonlight washed over him, and he knew this moment would remain within him, a lantern of memory he would carry long after he left the village. Chapter 4 Reflections in the River. The path from the shrine curved gently downhill, leading back toward the river. When Kato emerged from the forest, the moon had risen higher, its reflection stretching long and luminous across the dark water. The lanterns from the village glimmered faintly in the distance, but here the river dominated, wide and calm, its surface a mirror of sky and light. Kato stepped onto a stone bridge that arched over the current. The bridge was old, its stones uneven and worn smooth by generations of footsteps. Moss filled the cracks, and faint engravings along its sides told stories long forgotten. He stood at its center, leaning against the cool stone rail, and looked down into the water. The reflection was perfect. The moon floated there, bright and serene, framed by the silhouettes of trees. Kato felt as though he were gazing into another world, an upside-down sky where silence ruled and time slowed. A leaf drifted by, disturbing the reflection for a moment before the water swallowed it again. The moon reformed, whole and steady, as if reminding him of its constancy. The river whispered in its own voice a slow, steady sound of water brushing against stone. Kato closed his eyes and let the rhythm settle into him. Each breath he took seemed to align with the current, flowing, unhurried, carrying him toward a deeper calm. On the far bank, willows leaned toward the water, their branches dipping gracefully into the surface. Lanterns hung from a few, their lights wavering with the breeze, merging with the river's reflection. It looked as though the lanterns floated both in the air and beneath the water, creating a world between worlds. Kato thought of the lives that had crossed this bridge. Travelers, merchants, villagers carrying baskets of rice or wood, children running ahead of their parents. Each had left a trace, just as each lantern left its glow. Though the people were gone, their presence lingered, imprinted in the stones and the current. He lowered his hand into the river, letting the cold water flow around his fingers. For a moment, he felt connected not only to the river before him, but to the rivers of all times, the endless cycle of flow that connected mountains to seas, rains to streams, lives to memories. The river was both present and eternal, like the moon above. A sudden breeze swept across the bridge, and the willow branches rustled in response. The lanterns swayed, their reflections trembling in the water. Kato opened his eyes and smiled. The trembling did not disrupt the beauty, it deepened it, reminding him that change and movement were part of harmony. He stood on the bridge for a long while, watching the river, until his breath matched its flow and his mind rested in its quiet rhythm. The moon gazed down, patient and watchful, as if blessing the village, the river, and Kato himself. When at last he turned to leave, the sound of the water followed him, like a soft echo. It was not only the river's voice he carried but the awareness that silence itself was alive, flowing, and full. Chapter 5: The Returning Moon. As Kato left the stone bridge behind, the village appeared once more through the veil of moonlight. The narrow streets were quiet, the lanterns burning lower now, their flames softened to faint glows. The night was deep, yet he could sense dawn slowly approaching beyond the mountains. He walked through the silent lanes, noticing how the shadows stretched differently under the higher moon. The houses, with their sliding doors and low roofs, seemed to slumber. A dog barked faintly in the distance and then grew silent again. It was as if the entire village had entrusted itself to the night, while the moon stood as its guardian. Kato's steps carried him toward the small hill that overlooked the village. The climb was gentle, the path edged by tall grasses that swayed softly in the night breeze. When he reached the top, the view unfolded: the cluster of houses, the stone bridge, the winding river, and the forest where the shrine rested. All of it bathed in silver light, as though the moon itself had laid a veil of calm across the land. He sat beneath a pine tree and looked up at the sky. The moon was beginning its slow descent, but its brilliance had not waned. Around it, stars shimmered faintly, their presence quieter, like companions watching from afar. Kato closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The scent of pine needles mixed with the chill of night air, sharp yet refreshing. He thought of the shrine's silence, the river's reflection, the lanterns swaying among the willows. Each memory lingered vividly, not separate but woven together into one tapestry. He realized then that the moon's gaze had never been directed only at the village or at him. It watched everything: the silent rooftops, the whispering bamboo, the hidden paths, the drifting clouds, even the unseen creatures moving in the fields. The moon was witness, eternal and impartial, offering its light to all without question. A thought surfaced, gentle yet insistent. Perhaps to live in harmony was to reflect this impartial light, to see without judgment, to accept the world's silence and movement alike. The moon did not grasp or demand, it simply illuminated. As he sat there, the eastern horizon began to pale with the first hint of dawn. A subtle blue spread across the sky, dimming the stars. The moon grew fainter, but in its fading, Kato felt no loss. Instead, he sensed a quiet promise: though it would vanish from the sky, its presence would remain, hidden in memory, waiting to return. The village stirred faintly. A rooster crowed, a door slid open, and a faint clatter of buckets echoed from a courtyard. Life was awakening. Yet for Kato, the stillness of the night lingered inside him, as though he carried a fragment of the moon within. He rose slowly, brushed the pine needles from his clothes, and looked once more across the village. The rooftops gleamed faintly in the early light, the river whispered, and the shrine's forest stood dark but steady. The moon, descending beyond the mountains, seemed to bow farewell. Kato placed his hands together and bowed in return, not to the moon alone but to the village, the river, the shrine, and the silence itself. Epilogue: Eternal moonlight. When Kato returned to his own home days later, the memory of the silent village did not leave him. In the crowded streets of the town, where voices, footsteps, and the clamor of daily life filled every corner, he found himself listening for silence. At night, when the moon rose above the rooftops, he would pause and gaze upward. Though it shone in a different place, its light was the same. He remembered the still shrine, the river's reflection, the lanterns trembling in the willow branches. And with each memory came a calmness that steadied him in the noise of the world. He began to walk differently, more slowly, more attentively. In the sound of wind between buildings, he heard the echo of bamboo rustling. In the glimmer of street lamps on wet pavement, he saw the reflection of lanterns on water. The lessons of the silent village had not ended with his departure. They continued to live in every step, every glance, every breath. Sometimes, when others hurried past him, he would smile quietly. They did not notice, but he carried a lantern within him, lit by moonlight and silence. It was not a flame that burned away but a presence that endured, gentle and patient. Seasons turned. Leaves fell. Snow blanketed the rooftops. Blossoms opened once more. Through it all, the moon continued to rise, to watch, to depart, and to return. And each time Kato saw it, he felt the same humility he had felt on the hill above the silent village. One evening, standing by the river of his own town, he lowered his hand into the water and watched the moon tremble in its rippling reflection. He whispered not a prayer, not a request, but a simple acknowledgement. "You are here." And he realized that the moon had always been there, not only in the sky, not only in the village, but in the quiet spaces of his own heart. The world might shift, people might come and go, but the light of the moon and the silence it carried would remain eternal.